This episode is brought to you by Uno, and thus spake Sri Ramakrishna. Welcome back. This is Chicken Philosophy, Meccan Revelations, Part 28. I'm your host for today, Edward, and I'll be picking up right where we left off last time. That is some good coffee right there. Okay, so today we're starting a new section. That section is called The Lesser Resurrection and Initiatic Death. I feel like what we read last time was a similar... Oh, this is the okay, that was called the voluntary death. And I guess this seems like it's going to delve deeper into the same concept, but we shall see. Chapter 360, by the way, if you would like to start at the beginning of Meccan Revelations, my recital of it, or anywhere in the playlist, you can click there, that's the playlist. Few passages. This is italics, so we're going to be reading Michel Chodkiewicz for a while, the editor, and then we'll get to the translation in Arabi. Few passages in Ibn Arabi's writing more richly and succinctly illustrate his characteristic combination of scriptural interpretation, metaphysical penetration. It's my favorite kind of metaphysical. Sorry. Can you hear the train? And subtle allusion, with an A, allusion, like when you allude to something. It sounds like it could be a homophone with illusion if you're pronouncing things lazily, which I often do. Anyway, and subtle allusion to the fruits and pathways of spiritual realization. Then this short section from chapter 369, which evokes in a few lines the most central insights and principles of his thought and their indispensable practical foundations. On that level of realization, this whole passage can be seen as an extended commentary on the famous verses of Surah 102, parentheses, quote, "The proliferation of things distracted you until you visited the graves," end quote, end parentheses. I'm not sure what Surah is, but I know whatever will be, right? Anyway, where was I? Back there somewhere. Although it is only at the end of it that he openly underlines his particular understanding of the traditional Sufi distinction of the three levels of spiritual, quote, certainty, end quote. Based on that surah, the, quote, tombs, end quote, in this case, are man's ordinary, unenlightened existence in this world, and the, quote, death, end quote, that primarily interests Ibn Arabi here, parentheses, as in the preceding selections, end parentheses, is the, quote, lesser resurrection, end quote. Lesser is lowercase, resurrection is capitalized. Capital letters. Capital letter, singular, the R specifically. Anyway, the transformed awareness and immediate vision of the true reality of the self. Parentheses, summed up here in the famous hadith quote, he who knows his self knows his Lord, end quote, and parentheses. Does that one fly over anyone's head? Anyone? Did it fly over your head? He who knows his self knows his Lord. Is it too subtle? Maybe just subtle enough not to get his head cut off for being a Vedanta. Never mind. But here, what? And its undying life that is the constant center. Is that right? I mean, the heart of awareness. This thing we read a while back. Ashtavakra Gita. You know what I'm talking about? I pointed to it, so you can follow that link and watch those 6 episodes. It was short, so we got through it very quickly. What? And its undying life that is the constant center of his rhetoric and reflection. You ever look in a mirror? But here, my dad talks about mirror freaks. He means Jesus freaks. But he's actually kind of generalizing about people who insist upon externalizing, exteriorizing the reality of themselves into an external, worshipable, desirable, something, instead of having it, you desire it because it's not in you, it's in someone else. It's pretty general. Like, it's not just Jesus. Other people do that too. Maybe even you. On various levels. Like I think obsession with one particular person who's living and isn't necessarily worshipped by anyone else is kind of a form of that, actually. Yes. Anyway, mirror freaks. But here, this reawakened, he's not a mirror freak. That's a compliment from my dad. He's more of a journeyer than a flesh-based fear junkie. That's why we like Ibn Arabi. One of the reasons. Actually, did I tell you? Maybe I did. There was a book, I think it was 2004. I was temping at Screen Actors Guild. And there was a book in the free books bin, and it was a history of the Arab peoples, and I read half of it. I read from the beginning, which was kind of like, Muhammad and the situation he was in and what he did and all, kind of what resulted immediately after that. Up to like the 1200s, I read that much of this thick, voluminous thing. And I got up to Ibn Arabi, and I stopped reading that and instead bought this, because this seemed really interesting based on the way it was described in the history of the Arab peoples. That's how I stumbled upon Ibn Arabi. Okay, and it's, yes, but here this reawakened recognition of the full spiritual and imaginal dimensions of man's being and relation to God does not at all lead to some, quote, Gnostic rejection of the world and the complexities of this life. Yeah, when I was younger, I used to use Gnostic to refer to what he's talking about. And, if you recognize yourself, you recognize the Lord, and all this, like, really subtle, like, Vedanta philosophy. But then later I found out that if you're going to call yourself Gnostic, then that also means that you think that the Jewish God is the demiurge, and you believe in the archons and all this other stuff that I'm kind of like, oh, yeah. All I meant to say was that you don't have to go to the corporation, the Roman corporation, to get a special piece of unleavened bread to get there. That's all. It seems like a pretty harmless take. Like it's sort of like holding on to the mythology while rejecting the institution just as much as any atheist, or Martin Luther. But he did it in a particular way. That's the thing that one of the things that annoys me about Martin Luther. But anyway, if you know, you know. If not, just ignore that. Yeah. So it doesn't lead to some Gnostic rejection of the world and the complexities of this life. The reason he's pointing that out is because this sounds pretty Gnostic, right? Except for that other stuff, which I'm like right on board. Keep going, Ibn Arabi. I'm listening. To an illusory escape into the bliss of fauna instead. What? Is there a footnote? Editor Edward, would you tell us about this fauna? Maybe he'll explain it later, but what do you got there on Wikipedia? The annihilation of the self, to die before one dies. Okay, cool. I didn't obviously hear that. I'm not going to be disingenuous today and act like I did. Because I didn't. Because that's me in the future. You get it, right? How that works. Okay. Editor Edward is whoever's speaking in the future without his clothes on. I mean, without his costumes on. This is, unless you count this as a costume, but it's part of Edward's character to consider this like not a costume, but, well, anyway. Sorry, where was I? Yes. Whatever that word was, fauna. Instead, at this point, is one of the most crucial and distinctive features of Ibn Arabi's spiritual perspective. Throughout all his work, it is precisely the mystic's, quote, return, end quote, to those bodily, quote, graves, end quote, parentheses, and the concomitant awareness that our passage through this world is indeed only a, quote, visit, end quote, end parentheses. He's a journey. That completes his spiritual knowledge and certainty, while at the same time fully revealing man's unique position and responsibility as God's, quote, deputy, end quote. Did you see that episode of Deep Space Nine? Never mind. With regard to all the realm, Enterprise with Jonathan Archer. Deep Space Nine, also good, and there's probably one about a deputy. All right, anyway. With regard to all the realms of being, the necessary fulfillment of that ontological, quote, comprehensiveness, end quote, with all the perplexing suffering, sin, and distraction, and, begin parentheses, the full range of manifold distractions that it implies, is precisely what distinguishes the unique, parentheses, and avoidable. Oh, there was an end parentheses before that it implies. Okay. The distraction, parentheses, the full range of manifold distractions, end quote, that it implies, is precisely what distinguishes the unique, parentheses, and unavoidable, end quote, parentheses, role of the completely human being in Ibn Arabi's understanding of this, quote, divine comedy. That's an interesting phrase there, Mr. Arabi. You mind if I borrow it? Says don't you? Sorry, end quote. Nowhere is that comprehensive vision of man's destiny and true stature more succinctly and strikingly stated than at the end of this section, in his transformed interpretation of the familiar Gnostic symbol of the, quote, pearl, end quote, of the soul. Did that go over anyone's head? Sorry. Now we're reading translation. This is Ibn Arabi. This is what we've been talking about this whole time. This is what Michel Chodkowitz has been talking about this whole time. Here we go. This is Ibn Arabi, so I'm going to do the voice. The final outcome of the affair is the return from the many to the one. For both the man of faith and the polytheist, full stop, This is because the man of faith who is granted the unveiling of, quote, things as they really are, end quote, is granted, bracket parentheses, the immediate version of, and bracket parentheses, this, as he said, quote, now we have removed from you your veil so that your vision today is keen, end quote, Quran 50:22. And this is before he leaves this world. For everyone who is taken, bracket parentheses, by physical death, and bracket parentheses, is in, bracket parentheses, a state of spiritual, and bracket parentheses, quote, unveiling, end quote, at the moment he is taken, so that at that point he inclines toward God, and toward faith in him, and bracket parentheses, the true awareness of, and bracket parentheses, quote, no quote, divine unity with a capital U and a lowercase d. Unity is so capitalized that it makes divine lowercase by comparison. That's how I interpret that. Wrongly, but maybe there's something to it. Okay. Hence, the person who attains this certainty before being brought into the presence, bracket parentheses, of God at the time of physical, quote, death, end quote, end bracket parentheses, is absolute sure of his felicity and his conjunction with, bracket parentheses, that condition of blessedness, end bracket parentheses. For the certainty which comes from sound, bracket parentheses, rational, and bracket parentheses, inquiry, and unambiguous, bracket parentheses, experiential, and bracket parentheses, unveiling, prevents him from straying from the truly real with a capital T and a capital R. Since he has, quote, a clear proof, end quote, Quran 6:57, etc. In the matter and, quote, discerning inner vision, and, quote, Quran 12:108. But the person who attains this certainty, bracket parentheses only, and bracket parentheses, when he is brought into the presence, bracket parentheses, of death, and bracket parentheses, is subject to the, bracket parentheses, ineluctable, divine will, and bracket parentheses, okay, there's no bracket parentheses, what am I talking about? Editor Edward, what was that word? ineluctable. Unable to be resisted or avoided. Inescapable. I guess I didn't pay attention that day. And all right, where were we? And although the final outcome is, bracket parentheses, also end bracket parentheses, felicity, however, that is only after the imposition of torments and afflictions with respect to the person who is punished for his sins. For one is only, quote, brought into the presence, bracket parentheses, of death, and bracket parentheses, end quote, after having witnessed that to which the creatures are transferred, bracket parentheses, after death, end bracket parentheses. So long as he has not witnessed that, death has not come near him, bracket parentheses, Quran 4:18, etc. Nor is that, bracket parentheses, what we mean here by, and bracket parentheses, quote, being brought into, bracket parentheses, its, and bracket parentheses, presence, end quote. I think they must mean death, as they would have said his with a capital H if they were talking about the other thing. Three dots. Now God has brought two resurrections into existence, the lesser resurrection and the greater resurrection. The lesser resurrection is the transferring of the servant from the life of this world to the life of the intermediate world in the imaginal body, the imaginal body. As in, bracket parentheses, the prophets, end bracket parentheses, saying, quote, when someone dies, his resurrection has already begun, end quote. Thus, whoever is among the people of vision, with a capital P and a capital V, actually sees his Lord. For as is in bracket parentheses, God's messenger says, in warning his community about the Antichrist, did you know there was an Antichrist in Islam? If you didn't know that before today, click like and subscribe down below. That's what I'd say. Quote, no one sees God until he dies, end quote. The greater resurrection is the resurrection of the raising, bracket parentheses, of all men from their graves, and bracket parentheses, and the supreme gathering in which all men are joined, four dots. Or really, it's a period and then a space and then three dots. Something was cut out, in other words. Know that these bodies are the coffins of the spirits, and what beclouds them. They are what veil them so that they do not witness, bracket parentheses, the spiritual world, end bracket parentheses, and are not witnessed. So the spirits do not see, nor are they seen. We've all seen that episode of Vampire Diaries, right? Till Damon comes, and then what an odd pairing for like, what, a year? Bonnie and... sorry, what? So the spirits do not see, nor... Right. Nor are they seen except being parted from these, bracket parentheses, bodily, and bracket parentheses, tombs. Quran 102.2. By becoming oblivious to them, bracket parentheses, and their absorption in spiritual things, and bracket parentheses... No, not through, bracket parentheses, physical and bracket parentheses, separation. Therefore, since they have inner wisdom, when they become oblivious to witnessing the bodies, then they witness the one who gives them being, with a capital W, H, W, what? A capital O, a capital W, a capital B. The one who gives them being. In the very act of witnessing themselves, right? That's the thing, is it's deeper than whatever shallow shit, right? So, quote, he who knows his self knows his Lord, end quote. Likewise, he who witnesses his self witnesses his Lord, and thereby moves from the, quote, certainty of knowledge, end quote, to the, quote, certainty of seeing, end quote. Then, when he is returned to his, quote, bodily, end quote, tomb, he is returned to, bracket parentheses, the highest stage of, bracket parentheses, quote, true certainty, end quote, not to the, quote, certainty of knowledge, end quote. This is how man learns the, bracket parentheses, inner and bracket parentheses, differentiation of the truly real, through his informing, bracket parentheses, us, and bracket parentheses, of the true saying concerning the true reality of certainty, Quran 56:95. The seeing of certainty and the knowing of certainty, Quran 103:3-7. So for, bracket parentheses, the person who reaches this stage, and bracket parentheses, every property, bracket parentheses, of reality, and bracket parentheses, becomes firmly established in its proper rank, and things are not confused for him. Quran 2:42-371. And he knows that the, quote, bracket parentheses, prophetic, and bracket parentheses, announcements did not mislead him. Quran 6:5. Therefore, whoever truly knows God in this way has truly known and understood the wisdom, bracket parentheses, underlying and bracket parentheses, the formation of the pearl in its shell from fresh, sweet, bracket parentheses, water, and bracket parentheses, in salty, bitter, bracket parentheses, water, and bracket parentheses, Quran 25:53. The shell is its body, and its saltiness is its, bracket parentheses, physical, and bracket parentheses, nature. So the influence of nature predominates in its shell, but the salt is, bracket parentheses, also, and bracket parentheses, its whiteness. And that is like the light, capital L, which is revealed through it. So realize, bracket parentheses, what is meant by, and bracket parentheses, this sign, exclamation point. And that's the end of the section. And it's a nice, these are nice sizes. Maybe I'm reading them particularly. Well, no, the next one, well, we'll see. I don't know. I only saw the first 2 pages. I don't know how long the next one is. But that one I think was 4 pages. And so it takes me this long to read 4 pages. Sorry. That is what it is. You get what you get here. You can always go down the street to the books on tape, if there is one. All right, let me think. Well, there you have it. My thoughts for today, just as a reflection on this, and to conclude the episode. If you were wondering, if you're not wondering, then bye. All right, for the rest of you. My thoughts on just in general right now are, when you want to do it yourself, in other words, when you want to come to the conclusions on your own, I think it might help. Maybe not at the beginning, I don't know. Because for a long time I insisted on writing it myself, and only now, after, I'd say about 30 years of actively searching. Did I say 13? I meant 30. I would say that it's nice when you have an established view. It's nice to, at that time, look into different established groupthings along a generally similar train of thought. And then it's an interesting process to, as it comes in, some of it goes over here into the trash, or into the, all right, this is very specific and doesn't really apply to me, right? And then sometimes you catch one that's like, this I can use. And then to be able to incorporate that into the worldview that you had haphazardly stumbled upon accidentally in your wanderings for the previous 30 years. If you want to, but most of it you put into the category of not that. I mean, it's an interesting process. I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm not saying you should do this. It's just interesting to observe that I'm, to a certain degree, doing this. Coming through Jung at Meccan Revelations and Martin Luther and Teilhard de Chardin and whatever else. It's not something I would have done when I was like 14 through like 39, I was much more inclined to just say what I thought. But I feel like I've done that enough, and I want to take a step back and see what some of the other people thought at different times and places in the egregore, in the collective unconscious drama of it all, if that makes sense. Okay, I guess that's it for today, and I hope you're doing well, and we'll see you next time.